Hey guys, welcome to Predictapalooza Season 1 finale, where we are going to be restoring this Philco Predict 17-inch Siesta set. Now, some of you may be confused by what I mean by Season 1. Well, when I started doing this Predictapalooza series, in which I'm restoring a whole bunch of Philco Predicta televisions, I didn't quite know where things were going to end up. But I did know I'd be restoring a whole bunch of them, and I figured I would do a bunch of 17-inch sets, then a bunch of 21-inch sets. So roughly, Season 1 is the 17-inch sets, and Season 2 is the 21-inch sets. And I decided to save this one for last. It's different for a few reasons. One, it's the only Siesta we've done. Siestas have a clock in them, as you can see above the channel selector. Also, this has some unusual condition issues. I did do a sneak look at it at the end of an earlier video when I was doing triage on these sets as they arrived. I've also already started doing some work on this set. So right now it's partially disassembled because I've already been working on it. And this, this is going to be the most involved by far. You will see what I mean by that in a bit. For those of you who haven't seen the initial triage video, I'll give you a quick rundown. The set has condition issues because it's corroded and it had critters living in it. Found remains of nuts and shells. I assume they probably urinated on it. I'm not sure if that's where all this corrosion came from, but probably some of it. The circuit boards were nasty. At least one of the transformers had been gnawed on a little bit. But I decided to take on the challenge. Now somebody repainted this at some point. So I don't know if the corrosion is just confined to the lower inch or so of this, or if this was corroded as well. But this was repainted. They did a pretty nice job, and this was one of the original colors that came in, this sort of ivory color. Also came in gold and I think one other color, but I'm not positive. Now the odd thing is they also repainted the plastic shell here, but they didn't take off this plastic trim, so they both got paint on it and they didn't paint under it. I'm not sure what we want to do about that. Otherwise, they did a pretty good job. There are no runs or really orange peel or anything. I didn't bother to take the screws off, though, so the screw heads got painted over. I think I'll attempt to remove that because these are nice bronze screws under there. So cosmetically, it doesn't look so bad, although the brass plating has gone on that. I already repainted the arms at the owner's request. Perhaps I could use the same metallic paint on that collar so it all matches. Ditto on the end pieces here. Now I already pulled out the chassis and I pulled off the boards, and as you're about to see, I already washed down the main board. If you want to see what it looked like before, well, here I'll insert a before and after photo. Now, I have not pulled out the tuner or the clock mechanism, so I don't know if those are good. There's some nastiness I haven't cleaned out of that end yet. Now, I did discuss this cabinet with the owner, and I propose that I just dunk this in a sort of a benign rust remover like Evapo Rust, something that does not contain any acid, because I don't want to destroy the paint if at all possible. But I'd like to do something. At the very least, use a wire brush and spray on some rust neutralizer. Now the problem with soaking this is inside of this, behind this mesh, this is a fiber board. This can't get wet. In order to get that out, you gotta take a whole bunch of screws out and nuts and basically just take the whole friggin' thing apart. So as I said, I had a way when I examined this, and I decided, you know what, as a finale to the 17-inch sets, or at least this batch of them, let's just do it. So I'm stripping this whole thing down to bare bones and putting it back together. I hope the clock works. A common problem with this is because of the way they wired it up, is when people were going to take the back off or pull the chassis, they would rip these wires right out of the motor. This one does not appear to have had that problem happen to it, so that's a good thing. So we may be in luck with that working. Now, it's not just the clock. You can also set it, the alarm, to turn the TV on and off at preset times. I've never actually seen that work, but that's why the AC interlock is going through the clock mechanism. Kind of a neat feature, but at the very least I want to get the clock running, because it's kind of a nice thing. Very distinctive. It's a very distinctive part of this model as compared to all the others. Alright, so now let's continue on with the main board and speaker repair. Well, here's the main board, which is looking considerably better now. What I did is, after unwrapping all the wires and unsoldering the grounding stakes, I clipped out all the couplates, resistors, and capacitors I would normally replace, and then washed it down. I removed a couple of the tube shields as well to remove the corrosion. This one is still in place because this one's a little awkward to get out. It has 4 prongs that extend down and are crimped around the tube socket base. So either I need to remove the tube socket or uncrimp those connections. Either way, I literally want to get it out because I want to remove the corrosion. I don't want to have to dunk this whole board in rust remover to do so. One other thing I do want to remove is this dual control assembly. I'm going to unsolder it and remove it so I can remove the corrosion from it and get inside and clean the contacts. Little desoldering braid, and I got the 2 controls out without any issue, and I'm glad I did, even more so now, because I can see that there was more corrosion up against where this meets the board. So we're going to dunk that in evapo-rust. Let's see, you know what? No, I'm going to pry this open first and see what we have to work with. I mean, for all I know, the controls are burned out and shot inside. But assuming the carbon tracks are still good, we'll dunk the outer enclosure in evapor-rust and clean up the carbon tracks in there. While I'm waiting for that rust to dissolve, I'm also going to take a whack at the speaker. One, I want to remove all the stuff that's stuck to the magnet, and, well, more importantly, start working on that speaker cone. Before I do anything, though, I'll check for continuity in that voice coil. It does move freely and nicely. So, treating the speaker cone, what I'm going to do is take some Eileen's Tacky Glue. It's similar to Elmer's white glue. It's water-soluble crafting glue. Dilute it, it soaks into the paper very nicely. And when it dries, it will reinforce the paper fibers, and it dries with some flexibility. So if I get it around this edge here, the cone is still going to be able to move. It's not going to be hard glue that's making it much stiffer. Yeah, it'll add a little bit of weight to the paper, but not that much. That's why I dilute it and just put it on thinly, because I need to strengthen this paper that remains. Once that's done, I'll start working on some patches, and I'll also clean out all this, which is dust. So this was mounted this way in the set, so that is just years of dust and such settling down against the outer surround. It comes off easily enough. I don't want to accidentally glue that in place. We want to do everything we can to make this a nice speaker again. Luckily, there's not much corrosion. Basically none on the frame, so we don't have to deal with that, thankfully. I used a little pocket knife to carefully pry up the tabs in the back of this control housing, and it came apart easily. Looks to be in excellent condition. Probably saw very, very little use. This would be the coarse horizontal oscillator frequency adjustment and the height adjustment. And the contact wipers are here on the back side of the little adjustment things. So that goes in the bath. This gets a little deoxit treatment with a Q-tip, and put it back together. This is the stuff I'm talking about. I mix it up about 50-50 with water, and then apply it with a soft brush. Mix that up real good. Takes a little while. Alright, that should do it. May look horrible at first, but this will soak in and it dries clear. Just be aware that while this is damp, it'll be even more fragile until the glue sets up. So don't fuss with it too much. Just an initial pass to strengthen what's left of it. And there we go, piece of cake. Just needs to dry a little bit longer, and we are good to go. It's reinforced, strong, no rubbing with the voice coil. If I really cared about the color, I could paint that, but it's going to be inside the cabinet and completely obscured by the perforated metal grill on the front. I really don't see any reason to. This paper's a little bit thinner than the original, but I don't think that's really going to be a factor. It could be doubled up if one was really concerned about that. I think I will, though, go over this with a little more of the diluted glue once it's set up. Those light areas are where glue really didn't penetrate when I was brushing it on, it would appear. So, we are making good progress here. I started working on the main chassis in earnest last night. I removed the box over the flyback, and I have that soaking in some corrosion remover. And I started applying some rust stripper down in this corner. And I was working my way up towards this terminal stripper and was surprised to see that the original mounting rivets had been drilled out. It was being held in place with some screws. I knew some work had been done. The rectifiers had been replaced. That was in place of the feasible resistor. I think it's just a 1 ohm resistor. But I don't know why they would have drilled those out. I think they're the originals. But regardless, that got me thinking that, hey, since I've gone this far, how much more work would it really be to completely break this down? These transformers all come off easily. They're held in by one sheet metal screw, and then they tuck under for the other tab. There's a little slot in the chassis, so this has already been unmounted, as has the filter choke. Flyback high voltage assembly comes out very easily. More sheet metal screws, 4 long screws holding the transformer down. There are 1 or 2 transformer leads that are soldered to the chassis. Need to carefully unsolder those. I've replaced this transformer on one of these sets before, so that's not exactly unfamiliar territory for me to remove it and reinstall it. That guy needs to get replaced anyways. This unscrews. That with control has a couple metal tabs that can be straightened out. A little pull out. Control clusters are all just going to wire harnesses. In other words, I'm almost there. And I think it'd be a little break from the monotony of just restuffing boards to actually rewire this. I'll try to reuse some of the original wiring, just in the interest of preserving some of it and not having to spend an enormous amount of time rewiring the whole thing. But it is pretty deteriorated in some areas, especially down in here. I can't even tell the colors of these wires apart anymore. So anyways, I think that'll be fun. I'll get to it. Really, I just have to drill out a few rivets here and there and will be down to a bare metal. And I can dunk this in corrosion remover. And I have several completely untouched chassis I can use for reference as needed as to how to route the wiring. Well, after removing everything from the main chassis, I dunked it in the corrosion remover and it did a fantastic job. I did the same on the IF shield and any other parts that were dunkable. The rest I cleaned up as best I could, including recoating the flyback, or not recoating, but adding an additional coating of Corona dope. So I think we are ready to start putting it all back together. Only thing I'm not quite sure about is if I want to reuse these terminal strips. I'll look through my stash and see if I have something better, especially the one that was down here that had already been apparently drilled out and reworked. The main one that goes in here, it's in pretty good shape. There's a little bit of rust on one or two terminals. I can remove that. Then I can clean off the terminals. I think I'll reuse that. I don't think I have anything quite like it. The boards have already been restuffed. The controls. I noticed that the power switch had been directly shorted out, so I suspect it's not working anymore. I'll try to confirm that. I've had fairly good luck at rejuvenating these, fixing these, by prying up these 3 metal tabs, opening it up, cleaning out the gunk, putting some deoxit in there, and resealing it. These guys don't look too bad. I'll double check. I do have spares if I need to. Of course, the linearity control is bad. We'll be replacing that. In fact, that's the first thing I'm going to do is drill out that hole. Much easier to drill this hole larger to add a new pot than after I've installed anything. And then what? Here's a little pause for a progress update. Now, I don't know what order these were assembled in originally, but it seemed to me it made the most sense to start with the power supply. So I started working on the AC interlock, power transformer, cleaned up the terminal strips, and wired in the rectifiers, the voltage doubler caps, the filter choke, the final B+ filter cap, dropper, and caps for a couple other voltage rails, and then install the IF board. That's basically how I do it when I am restoring a set anyways. Take the IF board out, and that gives easy access to the power supply area. Once that all's done, I'll move on to this. Now, for the terminal strips, I noticed something curious when I took the old ones out. I'd noticed that they'd been installed with screws, but they also weren't the originals. And they were kind of crude, so I ended up tossing them and instead scavenged terminal strips from parts chassis. So I'm thinking something. I know some work had been done in this area on this chassis before I got to it. Maybe they broke these terminal strips while working on them and trying to remove the old parts. I don't know, but it was all just so ugly. I just took it all out and restored it. This terminal strip I was able to reuse. I just removed all the old wiring and cleaned it up well and reattached it with sheet metal screws. Some of the parts, I can't recall if this is, I don't think this is the filter, no, this is not the filter choke that came with this chassis. Similarly, I'm using a different vertical output transformer and audio output transformer. Reason being is that the originals are a little chewed up. So, for example, this is the original vertical output transformer. It had been gnawed on. I don't know that any of the windings were damaged, but the outer paper covering was, and the wiring is kind of nasty. So I figured, since I have some spares, I would go ahead and use those. which aren't particularly spectacular looking either, but at least they haven't been gnawed on, and the wiring is good. And this does have a good continuity and all that. So that's what we'll go with. All the other bits and pieces, like this little stand for the CR connector, they've all been through a corrosion remover and deoxit, and still have a few terminals to clean up. But that's what I've been doing with all the individual parts, and they're all in this tub. Probably won't be reusing much of this wiring, but at least I want to keep it handy so I have some idea how long the wires should be and what wires get bundled together. Next order of business I want to do is to install this board, but before I do, I have a little bit more work to do on it. I replaced all the tube sockets, but some of them have shields on them, and I had to remove those and remove the corrosion, and there's still one soaking right now. Once that's done and I install it here, I can go ahead and put this board in. It's so much easier to do when there's nothing else around it. The boards just plop right down, and I sort of look forward to redoing the wiring because I'll be using all new wiring, so I can use a wire wrap tool and everything will be nice and, well, as nice and neat as I choose to make it anyways. The one thing I think I'm going to have to, that's going to slow me down, is figuring out these wiring bundles. Those go to the control clusters, and there are wires that come from all over the place. For example, the wire that goes to the AC switch is over here. Some of the wires for the controls connect up over here, like for the volume control. Some connect up over here, some connect in various places all over there. So I need to figure out where they connect on the board, group them all together, and then run them over to the control harness and make sure they're all the right length when they get to the end. So yeah, that's going to be a little bit of fun. At least I have plenty of wiring. I bought a whole bunch of new spools, so I have a bunch of 50-foot long spools of the 600 volt rated wiring in a rainbow of colors. This is my old stash, which is starting to run out, so at least we have plenty of wiring to work with. Something else that's been very handy is my little black book of Predicta secrets here. I've made notes as I've been working on these over the years of where to connect various things. For example, this is the terminal strip for the power supply here. So I know where to connect the diodes and where to connect the caps, because that is one thing that's lacking in the service info, is they label these points on the terminal strip, like to say this is B1, and they say that's B11, B12, B13, B14, but they don't show those connections on the schematic. So hence I made up these cheat sheets, and this is the partial cheat sheet for this long terminal strip, so that's how I know where to hook all these parts up. I'm not doing it from memory. I actually have notes that I'm going off of. I'm far enough along I want to try doing a power up. I'll be doing that periodically as I rewire this set. So what I have right now is both boards are installed. The B+ power supply is wired up, and I just ran the filament supply to the two circuit boards and threw in about half of the tubes. I also put a dummy load on the B+. So I turn this on, I want to see two things. One, tubes glow, and two, around 275 to 300 for the B+. This load is less than the real load will be, so I'm not quite sure where that's going to leave us, but we'll find out assuming I got things right. So let's put the meter on DC volts. Alright, everything is set. Here we go. Current surged up to about 3/4 of an amp, settled down to about 1/4 amp. Tubes are lighting up. Okay, we have about 287 on a B+. Supposed to be 285. I did turn down my variac a bit, so I'm only feeding in about 105, 110. Excellent. We are on our way. So what next? I want to avoid installing the flyback, vertical output transformer, and audio output transformer, because they are big boxy things that will get in the way. So let's try wiring up this stuff. I'll start on the right hand side of things, I think. Try to get my feet wet at wiring up these controls and such. So over on this side we have the output from the tuner. Some coax comes in. There are only 3 or 4 wires that go to this board. Some go to the tuner, some go back this way. So I think that'll be a good place to start.